So it was about 6 or 7 years ago. We were sat down, and I'd been thinking about adoption for some time, but you was still a bit hesitant. Can you remember that far back?
Yeah, but I think it might have been longer than that because we were living two houses before,
Uh,
and there was a lot going on. So it's what 11 years since we got married. So it's been a few years,
mm,
just a couple of years after that. And I remember I wasn't in the headspace where I thought it was a good idea. And I wasn't very sure, but you were much more sure.
yeah, and I think that's when we heard about. Obviously, we selected our agency that we was going to go through. We'd done a bit of research,
Hmm.
and then we found out that they have some information evenings.
Well, you did, because I
Well, yeah.
remember you sent off the information even without telling me.
So we went to that. That was interesting because if you ever go to an information evening, and hopefully on the back of these you'll get an interest. It's it's strange because when you walk into the room,
Because it was
automatic,
in person in those days.
yeah,
They don't tend to do them in person now, do they?
no, and obviously two blokes walking in, we're the, I call it tick box, we're the token gays, but there was a mixed variety, and I never forget. They talked about BMI and stuff like that. They gave you lots of information about adoption, the pros, the cons, what the journey is going to be like, the background of the children. Very, very informative. Would highly recommend them. But I remember her talking about the BMI, and if you have a BMI over a certain time, I know it's changed as of late, that you wouldn't be able to adopt a child because you wouldn't be able to run or play with a child. And I'll never forget, I remember looking around the room and I put my hand up and I said, is that set in stone, that BMI figure that you're saying? Yes, it absolutely is. And then I said, that kind of wipes out the entirety of this room because we're all too fat.
That was a little bit cheeky.
But it was true. It was true. But we attended our first one, and even after our first information evening, we still weren't sure, were we?
No, and I think there were a couple of reasons, weren't there? Because you were still at uni
Yeah.
doing your nursing degree,
Mm.
and then I don't think we were really happy with where we were living in terms of, well, we weren't happy with where we were
No,
living, were we?
it wasn't right, was it? It
In
wasn't
terms of
right.
bringing up children there, and
Yeah.
yes, we'd got a house that was big enough, but it just wasn't something we wanted to do there, was it?
No, no. You need to make everything has to kind of like be in alignment, doesn't it? Don't we didn't want to just go into the journey for the sake of having kids because we wanted to have kids eventually when we both agree, but everything needed to be right and appropriate. So the house we lived in, although it was appropriate for us, it wasn't appropriate to
Mm.
bring two children in. Finances weren't right at the time.
I think I was just starting a new job, or just about to as
Yeah,
well. So
yeah.
there was all of that stuff going on. So it was probably a year later we went to another information evening, and a lot of people don't go to another one, and we
Yeah.
did, and it was in exactly the same place, and I think it was the same people talking,
Same people, yeah.
and they said the same things, um, but we were much more in a place where we thought it was something that we would be interested in.
And it was in that second information evening that they talked about what was then known as foster for adoption, which is now early permanence. And that's where you have, for all intents and purposes, a newborn come to live with you for a year before you can apply for adoption. You kind of foster that child for a year. And we knew straight away that early permanence was not for us, not financial reasons.
But but we were told not to close the door on it,
Yeah, yeah.
and we were still in that, yes, we'll do everything we're told and we'll do everything that you tell us to do
Mm.
mindset. So So we didn't close the door.
Mm,
I think it's also called concurrency in some places as well.
yeah,
But yeah, so after that, we wrote the email or the official, we registered an interest
yeah, and then we had the
with the
telephone.
telephone interview.
Yeah,
I remember pacing around the room with that one.
it was weird because although there was one person speaking to us on the phone, we kind of got the impression that there was other people listening into the call. That's just in our heads. It may only be
Yeah,
one
I don't
one
think it actually
person.
was.
Um, but yeah, so we had a telephone interview.
And it felt quite confrontational, I
Mm,
think.
yeah,
It was quite, it was really challenging in terms of, and it's probably in our heads that it was confrontational, but it was like a job interview, but worse. Because there was just a lot of pressure and stress in that because it was a half-hour call that was going to then make decide whether you could go forward.
mm.
And there's loads of stages in the process where things like that happen, where there's a big like stage gate or a big thing you have to get through. But it was quite stressy, wasn't it?
Well, I think having the face-to-face interview was more stressful.
Yeah, I don't think they call it interview now,
No,
like home visit or something.
but it was very much. We had a social worker come over to the house, and I think interrogation is the wrong word to use, but it felt like an interrogation.
Yeah, there were lots of questions.
Loads and loads and loads of questions. But now we understand the reasoning behind it because they want to make sure that the people that are applying for adoption are in the right mindset, are financially secure. And even having the interview, she kind of said, you've only just moved into this new house. You need to give it a little bit, get yourself settled in, get to know the area, and then you can go from there. But that was a really not intrusive process.
It was a bit intimidating as well.
Yeah. We do joke to who was our social worker who ultimately went through the whole process with her. We do remind her of our thoughts and relating to that first ever meeting and
Yeah.
interview.
And then the irony is now, like so many years later, like later this week, we are doing an information evening. So we are being the adoptive parents who have been through the process and done it all, and sharing our wisdom with
Mm.
people who are going through the process. But that's I really enjoy doing that because it sort of gives us a chance to reflect a bit like this does. But it also means that we can share that learning with other people and hopefully I don't know whether we inspire them or whether we or what we do, but it gives them that insight into what life's like.
So I think if you're just thinking about starting this journey, I think the take home messages are make sure you know you're in the right frame of mind, you're in the right place, you got your environment's right, you're financially secure, you both want the same thing, because the reason why it took us so long is because you needed to be in the right place as well. Then obviously, depending on which agency you go through, you'll have some information evenings or whatever your agency will call it, and then obviously you'll have a process that they follow. Our agency that we went through, they have a telephone consultation and then they have the actual face-to-face interview. So that's just the first snippet of what is a very long journey that you're going to go through. Um,
So yeah, the next one we're going to talk a little bit more about the stage one process, which is sort of getting all of your information together and sort of laying your life out. But we'll talk about that in the next video.
so see you next time.
Yes.